Hey guys, welcome back to the YouTube channel. So today I want to start this video off with a question to you. When was the last time you did something just to try and see what would happen? Not because of a grade, not because of money, not because you wanted to get to the next single step, but purely out of curiosity and just to try and see what would happen without any expectations of success or failure. And that is the premise of today's video. We're going to talk about Paul Millard and the pathless path, but more specifically, his framework, the ship, quit, and learn methodology. So with that said, let's get right into it. So Paul is the author of The Pathless Path, and it's a phenomenal book. There's a lot of ideas there that resonate with me personally, and he talks about the two paths that most of us fall into. The first and the most common is the default path, and the second path, the far less common, is the pathless path. So the default path, you can think of it in a way that is almost a path that is decided by societal expectations, what others may think, feel, or want. And a lot of times, most people don't even realize they're on the default path because all the decisions for them are laid out right in front of them. They never really have much of a say. You could say the movie is played out right in front of them and they know exactly what scene is coming up next. On the other hand, the pathless path is a bit more interesting. The pathless path is optimizing for curiosity and optimizing for tasks and actions that bring you joy. That doesn't necessarily mean, quitting your job or going backpacking off into Asia, but it actually means something much more different. It means figuring out what's important to you, what brings you happiness, and doing more of that. Regardless of what anyone else says, you're optimizing for yourself, and that's the key metric. So there are 4 key scripts that keep people locked into the default path. And the first one is optimizing for prestige rather than curiosity. You can think of this in a way where we're almost doing things that make other people say, wow, or make other people think what you have done is impressive rather than internalizing what is actually impressive to you. This respected option is making someone else happy even though it might make you miserable. The second script is delaying gratification. So this essentially is a way of thinking, I'm going to work hard now and I'm going to work hard all the way up until I retire and then enjoy the fruits of my labor. Then I'll live the life that I've always wanted. And again, a lot of people fall into this as default because they simply don't know any other way. They just believe that this is how it's supposed to be done, this is how it's always been done, and this is how I'm going to choose to live my own life. You're not optimizing, again, for joy, you're optimizing for societal expectation of success. The third script is to follow the proven path. So whatever path you're on, maybe it's engineering, medicine, law, it's almost to follow that path purely because everyone else around you and everything that you've ever known is based in and around that path. You can think of this almost as career autopilot. A lot of the decisions that you make are, once again, made already ahead of you. You don't have much autonomy to decide for yourself what it is that you want to do, what brings you happiness. You don't get the opportunity to experiment or try different things purely because everything you know is based on the path that you were told to follow. The fourth path is to hide your experiments because experiments are considered risky and the default path almost encourages you to stay in your safe zone. The problem is though that if you never give yourself the opportunity to try different things out, you'll never know what's possible. You'll keep playing in the safe zone and there's no room for growth. There's no room for real potential. Paul says the default path punishes experimentation because everything outside of the default path feels like a failure. Even for me, I felt this very, very strongly when I first started writing online. I didn't want to tell anyone that, hey, I'm publishing online on Twitter, check out my profile. I hid everything for almost a year. In fact, I didn't even put my own name on my Twitter profile right up until the first 3 months. I was so scared, I was so in my own head because I didn't know how to bring this up. I didn't know how to tell this to anyone. And it feels the same way with YouTube. I'm still kind of getting into grasps of this is something that I can do and this is something that I'm willing to share and willing to bring into the world. So what's the alternative? What Paul says, and what I strongly believe as well, is that you should optimize for adventure, and for curiosity. And once again, that doesn't mean, quitting your job or dropping out of high school or dropping out of university. No, in fact, it means designing your life in a different way where you're thinking about things in terms of experiments. You're thinking about things that bring you joy, and you're thinking about things that you personally are passionate about. There are a couple of ways you can think about this. The first one is to follow excitement. Think about things that make you come alive. Excitement doesn't always mean that it's going to be exciting forever, but for now, if you were to ask yourself, what is it that brings me joy? What is it that I can't wait to do from the second I wake up? The second thing to think about is, where does friction decline? So let's say, for example, in my case, I know that when I write, I feel like everything slows down. I love the fact that I can get my thoughts right in front of me on paper. And as hard as it is at the start, I love the process, and I can feel that there is an element of friction that's slowly but surely declining. That is great signal. And the third thing to think about is, regardless of what happens, detach from the goals. Don't think about success, don't think about failure. Just think about what would happen if you were to try, if you were to experiment and just put yourself and this work in front of you out there. Now let's talk about the ship, quit, and learn method. So basically, the ship, quit, and learn method is very simple. It's almost designing your life in terms of experiments rather than specific set outcomes. And it's a very small way to push yourself from the default path to the pathless path. And what's good to keep in mind is that you can take as many of these experiments, whether it's creative, whether it's business oriented, it's all about trying new things. And the word ship, you can think of this as analogous to publishing. So let's assume you've got a writing project in mind. You've been wanting to publish for years, and you've almost had this idea of success and failure, of wondering what people would think, wondering what people would say. Would anyone read your work? Would anyone like your work? All of those thoughts, all of those ideas are often enough keeping you from publishing your work in the first place. So the key is to lower the expectations and reframe from, instead of going from success or failure, to just positioning yourself to shipping first, quitting if you need to, and taking away whatever you learned in the process to move forward into the next experiment. And that's exactly what I did with Twitter. When I started writing, I had the exact same fears as I just said, but I kept publishing day after day. I didn't stop for a little over 3 years, and I kept going through every single obstacle you can think of. Med school exams, moving countries, breaking a tooth, like everything you can imagine. I just told myself that, hey, what would happen if I keep publishing every single day? Whether I succeed or fail, that's not in my control. But the only thing that's in my control is shipping, and shipping consistently. Eventually, I did stop writing on Twitter. I quit. Not because I thought that Twitter was too hard, but it just didn't feel right for some reason. So I stopped, but in that process, I learned so much. I learned how to write online. I learned how to connect with amazing people from across the globe. And all those skills are what's taken me from writing now into business and startups. And I'm hoping that that's what's going to expand my growth and my ideas to another level. And that's what I want from you. I want you to think about what it is that you can ship and what it is that you can get out into the world starting today. It's all about not waiting for permission. You just have to ship something small, nothing major, nothing that's going to be groundbreaking. Maybe it means opening up a Substack profile and publishing your first note. It could mean opening up a Twitter account and publishing your first few tweets. And I know this is all oriented in terms of writing, but it doesn't have to be that way. It can be whatever you want. It could be art, it could be a business idea. Start small and figure it out later. Paul says this really nicely. He says, you're designing your life for your own adventure. And I love that because I didn't know in my own case what I'd be writing for. Maybe some days it was writing about my exams, how I studied, about psychology, about habits, and then became startups and anything and everything. It was an adventure. It was a process. And I only learned because I shipped, because I experimented. I didn't think too far ahead. I didn't care. I detached from the outcome. And that's exactly what's key here. And after those 2.5 years, I had data about myself. I knew I could write consistently, I knew I could build an audience, and I knew how to connect with people. And those skills in and of itself have taught me so much. But Twitter wasn't my only experiment. I had dozens and dozens of experiments that failed and never hit the mark. For example, one of my first business ideas was to launch a cohort-based course, and I had got 50 plus signups. I had got the access to a platform where I could host this cohort-based course. Everything was set right after graduating. This was the project that I was putting all my time and effort to for the entire summer. And then at the very last minute, the course platform pulled the plug on the project. They said, we're not going to host it anymore. And of course, that's not something you want to hear, but it happened. And within the same year, I launched a consulting business. That failed miserably too. I just had one client and I quit after 3 months. At the time, they were all devastating. They were all really painful, and I couldn't really figure out how to move forward. What I did consistently do was ship my ideas and see where they would take me. So even in the midst of quitting so many experiments, I kept a couple of them running, and I kept learning in the process, both from the ones that I failed and also from the ones that I succeeded. So you see, some experiments worked, others didn't. And that's exactly the point. As Paul says, it's only by taking action that we learn, and it's only by learning we realize what we actually want. So here's what my experiments have taught me over the last couple of years. The first is I care about depth rather than just reach. I want to make a deeper impact on a few people rather than making a shallow impact on thousands and thousands of people. I learned that writing energizes me. I learned that I'm not that great at chess, and I learned that I have a lot of work to do to get better at football and paddle. Again, they're all experiments. They're all things to learn from. And that's the loop. Ship, quit, and learn. And just in that loop itself, making dozens and dozens of experiments teaches you things about yourself that you wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn otherwise. So, how do you start your own experiment? The best method, as Paul recommends, is to start with one experiment that you can stick with for 30 minutes a day for 30 days straight. It's small enough to get the momentum building, but it's just impactful enough to keep you pushing in terms of how far you can take this specific experiment. But the key is not to choose something that sounds impressive or what makes money, but it's instead to what makes you curious. It could be painting, it could be writing, it could be recording videos, it could be genuinely anything. 30 minutes, 30 days straight, write it down on a piece of paper and make the commitment. What are you going to ship, and what's your experiment going to be? The most important thing is, can you see yourself do this for 30 minutes a day, every single day? If yes, you found your experiment. The next step is to think about how can you make your experiment fun? Because if it's not fun, you're going to quit too early, and eventually you're not going to learn anything. And the most important thing to keep in mind is that this is not a forever decision. You can build your experiment and you almost have an exit ramp at the end of the 30 days. So if it's not something that you can stick with or not something that you want to continue moving forward, that's completely fine. It's an experiment after all. Ship, quit, and learn. The final thing to keep in mind is, what will you learn? You're optimizing once again for learning and curiosity. So rather than thinking to yourself, I will achieve XYZ by a set period of time, you're instead telling yourself, I will try X for Y period of time, and by the end of it, you will learn Z. So that reframe in and of itself will be huge and unlock and give you this idea of what it is that inspires you, that creates this inner curiosity for you above anyone else. So now it's your move. Ask yourself, what's your experiment going to be? I want you to work it through and make it so small and so actionable that it doesn't feel like a heavy lift. It's light, it's easy, and you can stick with it for 30 minutes daily for 30 days straight. Don't raise the bar, don't have high expectations. Just remind yourself of ship, quit, and learn. And trust me, the knowledge is going to compound. And by the end of the 30 days, you're going to figure out something about yourself that you wouldn't have otherwise. And with that said, I'll leave you with one final thought from Paul. He says, we're living in a time where this default path is fading away. The pathless path is becoming more and more powerful and impacting more lives than ever before. So if you're feeling stuck, there's a very good chance that it comes down to one of the 4 scripts. And it's time to ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to stay on the default path, or are you going to emerge into the pathless path? And with that said, let me know in the comments below, guys, what your experiment is. Leave a like in the video, share with your friends, and I'll see you in the next one.